"No one marries a fat widow, sir. But I can work," said the young widow. The cowboy's reply broke her silence. Dry Creek Ranch, Central Texas, spring, 1868. The war had been over 3 years, but the land still looked wounded. Fences leaned like tired men. Trees stood stripped by past storms. And yet, under the cruel sun, the bluebonnets rose. Blue, bold, alive. They blanketed the dry hills like a reminder that beauty could still bloom from scorched ground. Caroline Doss stood at the edge of the corral, dust on her hem, the morning sun hot on her back. 23, already a widow, already forgotten. Her figure, soft and full, wrapped in a faded calico dress that had once been her mother's, now stitched and restitched to fit a body that fed itself on grief and survival. A group of ranch hands lounged near the stable wall, chewing tobacco and leering. One nudged the other and said loud enough for her to hear, "Maybe she thinks we're hiring cooks with saddle weight." The others chuckled. "She here for the cattle, or to sit on 'em?" Another round of laughter broke out. Caroline did not flinch. She had heard worse from her own kin after Thomas died. She adjusted her shawl and stepped forward until she stood before the man holding the ledger. "I'm looking for work," she said, her voice firm but not loud. The man behind the ledger, a freckled youth with more arrogance than experience, looked her up and down and smirked. "We ain't runnin' a charity, ma'am." "I am not asking for charity," she replied, then looked past him, toward the tall figure leaning against the far stall. He had said nothing, just stood there, arms crossed, shadow stretching long behind him in the morning light. He had a weather-worn face, jaw rough with stubble, eyes the color of storm-churned water. She turned back to the youth. "I can ride, I can brand, I know cattle and fencing. I am not afraid of dust, or men." "That's so," one of the ranch hands jeered. "Bet you ain't afraid of eatin' neither." The group howled again. Another voice cut through the laughter, dripping with mockery. "Reckon she's not here for work at all, probably lookin' to find herself a husband." She held her ground, chin lifted. Then, slowly, she said it, calmly, like it was just fact. "No one marries a fat widow, sir, but I can work." The laughter cut short. Dust settled. Even the horses stilled. From the far end of the stable, the tall man pushed off the stall and walked forward. His spurs clicked once, twice, then silence again. He looked at her, long and clear. Not like a man measuring a woman's worth by her waist, but like someone reading a weather pattern in the sky. "You look like someone who's been through worse," he said quietly. "That's the kind of strong this place needs." No one moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Caroline turned toward him. Their eyes met. For a long, quiet second, she did not see pity in his gaze, only recognition. As if he, too, had stood in rooms where he was not wanted. As if the storm behind her eyes met the storm behind his. She gave a single, small nod. Finn LaRue nodded back. Then he turned to the boy with the ledger. "She rides with me tomorrow." And just like that, the barn went silent again. The first days were the hardest. No one told Caroline where the feed sacks were stored. No one helped her lift the branding irons. When she trailed too far behind driving cattle, the others made sure their jokes floated loud enough on the wind. "She's slower than molasses in a January freeze. Maybe she thinks them cows are cousins." She said nothing, just worked. Her hands blistered, her back ached, her dress was stained beyond salvation. But every morning, before sunrise, she was there, tightening saddle straps, hauling fence wire, learning the land with the silence of someone who no longer asked to belong. And every morning, the same quiet grace, her rope coiled and hung neatly beside the barn wall, a full water skin resting by her saddle, and her tack cleaned and shaded beneath the oak tree near the corral. She never saw who did it. But she knew. Finleroux rode out before the rest, disappearing into the horizon like a man chasing something he could never catch. He returned late, dirt on his boots, silence in his eyes. But Caroline noticed the way he always checked the hooves of her horse before mounting his own, the way his gaze lingered on her hands when they bled. But he said nothing. Until one day, when a coil of barbed wire slipped and tore the skin across her palm. She winced, sucking in her breath through her teeth, trying to wrap the wound with her sleeve. Without a word, Finn appeared beside her. From inside his coat, he pulled out a folded handkerchief, white, delicately stitched, its corners yellowed with age. He handed it to her. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "She did not like to see blood." Caroline hesitated, then took it with both hands. The fabric was soft, smelled faintly of cedar and old lavender. Her throat tightened. She did not look at him. She only nodded, once. That evening, after the others had eaten and disappeared into their tents, Caroline returned to the bunkhouse. A glow flickered near the fire pit, and beside it, her boots. She stopped. They had been cleaned, dried, the worn soles shaved down and reshaped. Inside the tongue of each boot, a small strip of leather had been hand-stitched, soft, precise, made for comfort. She turned. Finn sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. He did not look up. "Shoes ain't supposed to punish the ones who walk," he murmured. "Now you can ride longer." She did not reply, just slipped off her own boots and pulled the others close. That night, she wore them to sleep. By the end of the week, he was teaching her how to tie war knots on reins, loops that spoke without needing to tug. "Horses listen better when they are asked, not commanded," he told her. She listened. Her fingers fumbled at first, but she learned, fast. Sometimes they rode together in silence. Sometimes he watched her from a distance as she led calves across shallow streams. Once, as they led the herd back through a muddy trail, she slipped. Her hands landed in a patch of wet earth. Before she could rise, he was there, crouched, pulling her up. He took the sleeve of his own shirt and wiped the muck from her fingers, gently, like brushing dust off old pages. He said nothing. Neither did she. In the bunkhouse, she kept her hat on at night. He never asked why. Finn never joined the other men around the fire. She never asked why either. Some nights, they crossed paths between the corrals and the bunkhouse and only exchanged nods. But in that silence, something lived, a knowing, a respect. Two souls the world had stopped seeing, beginning to see each other. One evening, when the sun had fallen low and gold light stretched across the dry land, Caroline sat on the back steps of the kitchen cabin. Her dress had torn at the hem again. She pulled out a needle and thread. From inside her pocket, she drew out the white handkerchief and began sewing it into the lining of her dress, where it would brush against her ribs with every move. Finn walked past, leading a young horse toward the pen. He paused, saw the stitchwork, the fabric. He did not speak, but he smiled. Not the kind of smile you give to strangers, or even friends. It was a small, rare thing, like spring water found deep in rock, a flicker of warmth that said, "I see you. I see what you carry." And for the first time, the silence between them felt full. The sun was still low when Finn and Caroline rode out with the cattle. The herd had wandered close to the canyon rim, a stretch of land wild and sharp with cedar and rock. Most men avoided it. But Finn said the grass there was thicker this season, and Caroline, without question, followed. She had grown steadier in the saddle, no longer needing help with her stirrups, no longer shifting uncomfortably when the trail got rough. The new boots held strong. The war-knotted reins sat easy in her hands. By midday, the air turned dry and tight. The herd began to bunch, restless. Finn halted his horse. He stood in the stirrups, eyes scanning the ridge above. "Something's watching," he said, voice low. Then they heard it, a yip, distant but near enough to raise every hair on the back of Caroline's neck. Wolves. Not one, but several. The cattle moaned, shifting in tight groups. Caroline slid from her horse, drawing the small revolver she kept tucked under her skirt, something Thomas had insisted she learn to use when they first homesteaded. A shadow darted through the brush, followed by two more. One wolf stepped out into view, golden-eyed, ribs sharp against its fur. It let out a warning growl. Before Finn could reach for his rifle, Caroline raised the pistol, aimed just left of the wolf's snout, and fired once into the dirt. The crack shattered the silence. The wolf flinched. The rest scattered into the brush. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Finn looked at her, not startled. Not impressed. Just seeing her. Really seeing her. She exhaled slowly, tucked the gun back beneath her skirt, and met his gaze. He gave a single nod. No words. But it was enough. They found a clearing near a creek and made camp before nightfall. The cattle were calm now, grazing under moonlight. Finn set the fire. Caroline laid out the biscuits and jerky she had packed. They sat across from each other, the flames crackling between them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Caroline noticed something in Finn's hand. A small, worn, wooden cross. Its top arm was broken, the surface darkened with age and smoke. He turned it slowly between his fingers, thumb brushing over the jagged edge. "My mother gave it to me when I joined up," he said, voice quiet. "Said it would keep me safe. I made it home. My brothers didn't." She said nothing, just listened. He looked down at the cross. "We buried them with nothing. I kept this." A silence passed. Then he looked up, and for the first time, the weight behind his eyes met hers with nothing in the way. "War didn't kill me," he said, "but it made me forget how to trust someone. Until now." She did not reach for his hand, did not offer comfort. Instead, she broke her biscuit in half and slid it across the blanket to him. He took it, and they ate under the stars, the wolves gone, the cattle resting, the night holding a silence that felt less like absence and more like peace. The light was turning gold when they reached the hill. Caroline led the way, her boots stirring up dry earth with every step. Behind her, Finn followed in silence, leading his horse by the reins. The wind moved through the grass in long sighs, carrying the scent of sun-baked soil and wild bluebonnets. They said nothing as they climbed. At the top of the rise, nestled between scattered stones and weather-worn markers, stood a single grave, marked only by a leaning wooden cross and a name carved faintly into its surface. Thomas Doss. Caroline stopped. She stood there for a moment, as if unsure how to approach. Then she knelt, brushing dirt from the base of the marker with the edge of her sleeve. Her breath caught in her throat, but she did not cry. "He died loving me." Her voice was hoarse, like it had not been used in days. "But the living can't even look at me without laughing." The wind pulled at her skirt, lifting it in soft folds like a curtain around her grief. She didn't move. Her fingers traced the carved letters on the cross. "I know what I am, Mr. LaRue," she said slowly, eyes still fixed on the grave. "Too wide for a dress, too tired for dreams, but I can work. That's all I've got left." There was no bitterness in her tone, no defiance, only truth. The kind of truth you say aloud because it no longer hurts to admit, only to live with. Behind her, Finn shifted. The sound of his boots in dry grass was soft, careful. He stepped forward, the last light of day catching on his shoulders, casting his shadow long and thin across the grave. He did not offer sympathy, did not reach for her, or try to ease what could not be eased. He simply said, Then, I will not ask for your hand. I will ask for your shadow beside mine. Caroline looked up. Her eyes were rimmed in red, but dry. She studied him the way a woman studies something she never thought would come for her, a kindness that did not come with a price. She stood slowly. Finn reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, rusted horseshoe, no larger than his palm. Its edges were worn smooth, one side cracked. He knelt beside the grave and set it gently in the dirt before the marker. They say a horse never runs alone when it leaves its print beside another. Then he reached into his saddlebag, took out a cross carved from pine, and pushed it into the ground beside the grave. His hand trembled, but the cross stood firm. The wind stirred the grass. Somewhere behind them, Finn's horse snorted softly, almost like a breath of approval. Caroline reached down and touched the old horseshoe. It was cold at first, but as she held it in her hand, the chill faded, replaced by something slow and steady and warm. "You're a strange man, Mr. LaRue," she said softly. "Maybe," he replied. Then, with a small, tired smile, "but not as strange as the way you keep standing when the world tells you to sit down." She looked at him, really looked, and in that moment, something loosened in her chest. Not healed, but shifted. She turned her gaze back toward the field. The bluebonnets moved in waves across the hill, flickering like tiny, stubborn flames. She breathed them in. Finn held out his hand. She hesitated, then placed her rough palm in his. Together, they walked back down the hill, leaving behind a grave, a cross, and a rusted horseshoe beside it. But they also left something else. 2 sets of footprints side by side. A promise neither had made out loud, but both had already begun to keep. The sky turned orange long before sunset. Smoke. It curled above the tree line like a warning, dark and angry. Caroline was hauling buckets from the well when she caught the scent, burnt leather, grease, and something worse, fire. She dropped the pail. Water splashed across her boots. Then came the sound of hooves, fast, reckless. She looked up to see 2 ranch hands galloping back toward the bunkhouse, eyes wide with fear. "They're back," one of them shouted. "It's them bastards from the McVeigh Ridge." Before she could ask how many, the shot rang out, sharp, close. A bullet split the side of the barn, wood shattering inches from her head. She ducked. More shots echoed across the yard. Cattle cried out, stampeding in the lower field. Dry Creek was under siege. Finn had gone out early that morning to ride the fence line. He was not back. That left Caroline. She ran to the shed. Her hands moved fast, unthinking. The revolver, powder, 2 spare rounds. She tucked them into the pocket of her apron. Outside, a group of men on horseback had already lit torches. The feed store was in flames. One of them, a thick-chested brute with a red scarf tied around his jaw, pointed and laughed. "Whole place'll be ash in 10 minutes, he barked. "Tell that boss of yours this land belongs to no one now." Caroline stepped out from the shed and raised the pistol. Her heart was pounding, but her aim was steady. She did not yell. She did not warn. She just fired. The bullet struck the red-scarfed man in the shoulder, spinning him off his horse. The others scattered, surprised to see a woman, that woman, standing her ground. "You want this land?" she shouted, voice breaking from the smoke. "You'll have to walk through me." The red-scarfed man groaned on the ground, trying to crawl backward. His men hesitated, unsure whether to shoot or run. That is when Finn arrived. His horse came flying over the ridge, hooves pounding like thunder. He did not shout either, just pulled his rifle and took down the nearest rider in a single shot. Chaos exploded. Dust, hooves, fire. Finn dismounted mid-run, charging toward the barn to cut off the flames. But one of the men had circled behind. A blow came from nowhere, a wooden beam cracked across the side of Finn's skull. He dropped. Caroline screamed. "Finn!" She ran, kneeling beside him, as the assailant moved closer, gun raised. She spread her arms over Finn's body. "Don't touch him!" she cried, voice raw, shaking with fury. The man paused, startled by the force of her scream. From the dirt, Finn groaned. His eyes fluttered open. Blood dripped from his temple. Caroline kept her arms around him, panting, terrified, furious. The gunman backed away. One of the remaining ranch hands had finally joined in, raising his own rifle. The invaders retreated, dragging the wounded man with the red scarf toward their horses. The fire was still eating the feed store, but the wind had turned. The barn would hold. Caroline leaned over Finn. His face was pale, lips cracked. She cupped his cheek. He looked up at her with a slow, tired smile. "You're the bravest thing I've seen since war," he whispered. Then he passed out. She dragged him to the water trough and cleaned his wound. Her hands shook. She did not care. Later, after the fire was out and the threat gone, Finn sat by the bunkhouse steps, his head bandaged. Caroline brought a rag to his forehead. He took her hand, reached into the pocket of his coat. From it, he pulled a small silver chain. Hanging from it was a crescent moon, worn, simple. "My mother wore it every harvest season," he said. "Said it brought strength when the land was dying." He reached up and fastened it around her neck. "It looks better on you." The rain came sudden, heavy, Texas rain, pounding and relentless. It washed through the gutters of Dry Creek, turned roads to mud, and blurred the outlines of houses and barns into gray ghosts. The sky sagged low, as if the clouds themselves were mourning something not yet buried. In the general store, two women stood whispering behind sacks of flour. "She's got him wrapped around her apron strings. She ain't even 30, and already a widow twice over, if you count that land grab." Across the street, an old man spit into a rusted can. "Ain't right, him lettin' her stay on after what she's cost this place. That boy's head's gone soft." Caroline heard every word. She stood by the back door of the store, hands clenched around a parcel of dried beans. The weight of their stares, the muttered words carried by wind and wood and wall, it pressed harder than the fire had. No one remembered the day she shot to protect the ranch. No one thanked her for saving Finn's life. They only saw what they wanted. A fat young widow too bold to be pitied, and too brave to be forgotten. That evening, as the sky cracked open and thunder rolled across the plains, she packed. No goodbyes, no letters, just what she came with, and a few things she had earned. Boots that fit now, a saddle rag, a silver chain with a crescent moon. She harnessed the wagon herself. The old mare, borrowed from the Dry Creek stable, stomped once, uneasy from the storm. Caroline did not flinch. She climbed into the seat and took the reins. The road out twisted past the main gate, then followed the river for 6 miles before it split east toward Bastrop. That was where she aimed, not because it promised better, just because it was a way. Rain beat against the canvas overhead. Her shawl was soaked through by the time she reached the split in the road. And that was where she saw him. Finn, on horseback, soaked to the bone, his hat gone, hair slicked against his skull, his coat open, breathing hard like he had been riding fast. He blocked the road, hands loose on the reins. She pulled the wagon to a stop. "I ain't here to argue," she called over the rain. "Move, Finn." He shook his head. "You don't leave the one person who makes this dust feel like home." She stared at him, jaw tight. "You heard what they say about me." "I hear what they say about everyone," he said, "but I listen to you." Silence stretched between them, filled only by rain on canvas and leather and skin. Then he reached into the pocket of his coat. He pulled out a small square of fabric, wet now, edges frayed. He held it like it was something sacred. It was the handkerchief. The same one she had used weeks ago, wiping sweat and fear from her face after the wolf pack. He stepped forward and placed it in her hand. "I've carried this since the night we met the wolves," he said. "Thought maybe one day I'd give it back when I knew you weren't running anymore." Caroline looked down at the cloth. Rain rolled from her cheeks, but it was not clear if it came from the sky or somewhere deeper. She climbed down from the wagon, walked to him, close enough to see the cut above his brow that had not healed clean. She said nothing, just pressed the cloth to his chest, held it there, felt the beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I don't know how to stay," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "Just don't go." They stood like that, unmoving, while the storm raged around them, and in the mud beneath their boots, the water carved small rivers. But they held their ground. The fire began in the shadows. No one saw who set it. No one confessed. But by the time the smoke curled above the rooftops of Dry Creek, the flames had already swallowed half the chapel. It was the old church, the one Caroline had slipped into on her first month at the ranch, sitting on the last pew, hands clasped not in faith, but in fatigue. It was where she lit candles for Thomas, where she whispered words not even the wind bothered to carry. Now it burned like judgment. Children screamed, bells rang too late, men ran with buckets, but the wind worked faster, fanning flame across the wooden walls and roof like a devil's breath. Caroline heard the cry just as she reached the edge of town. A child, inside. Before anyone could stop her, she ran. Through smoke, through splinters. The heat blistered her arms, clawed at her skirt. The air bit at her lungs, but she pushed forward, following the sound. She found the boy under a collapsed beam, crying, but alive. 6, maybe 7, with eyes wide and wet. She lifted the wood with her bare hands, wincing as it burned her palms. She pulled him free, wrapped him in her arms, and staggered toward the doorway through a rain of ash. She emerged, coughing, her dress torn at the sleeves, hands blistered and blackened. Her hair, once tied back neatly, hung loose, half-singed, a halo of smoke and soot around her face. The child clung to her side. People stared. And then Finn was there. He galloped through the crowd, leapt from his saddle before the horse had stopped, and ran toward her. When he saw her, standing in the middle of the square, smoke curling around her shoulders like wings, the child still clutching her side, he stopped. His boots hit the ash-covered ground. He walked the last few steps, and then he dropped to his knees. Right there, before the whole town, before the whispers and the shame, the scorched chapel and the bleeding sky. He looked up at her, eyes shining not with tears, but clarity. "You're not too much," he said. "You're just enough, for me." Caroline blinked. Her lip trembled, but she said nothing, only held the boy tighter. Around them, the town fell silent. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate. A woman stepped forward, white hair tied in a bun, dress plain and old but clean. Her hands trembled as she approached, then steadied as she reached for Caroline's shoulder. She rested her hand there gently. "I was a widow once," the woman said, voice cracked but strong. "But I never dared live like you do." Caroline looked at her, really looked, and saw something in those eyes. Not pity, not approval. Understanding. The townspeople stood still. The fire was out now, but smoke lingered, curling through the air like something unsaid. Caroline looked down at Finn, still kneeling. She reached out and touched his cheek with her burned hand. He flinched, not from pain, but reverence. Then she turned to the child. "Come on, sugar," she whispered. "Let's find you some water." She walked forward. Finn rose and followed, and behind them, the town parted, silent, watching, unsure of what they had just witnessed. But something had changed, not in the fire, not in the chapel, in them. They never had a wedding. No white dress, no church bells, no cake sweet enough to make folks forget who she had been. And that suited Caroline just fine. Instead, they took hammers to the walls of her old homestead. The Doss Ranch had stood abandoned for years, windows broken, porch slumped, fields overgrown. But beneath the dust and rot, the bones still held. So did she. Finn rebuilt the fence posts. Caroline scrubbed the floors until the wood shone again. They did not speak much about what it meant, but every board nailed, every seed planted, said enough. This was home. Word spread. Slowly. First, a woman came with her niece, parents gone to illness, no kin to claim her. Then a boy with a twisted leg. Then 2 brothers, who had not spoken since the war, took their father. Caroline took them all in. She cooked for them, tucked them in at night, sat beside them on the porch with Thomas's old books, tracing the letters of the alphabet with patient fingers and quiet hope. Finn taught them to ride, to whistle sharp enough to bring the horses, to braid reins with soft leather and chew peppermint from his coat pocket. He never raised his voice, but they listened to him like he was carved from the very land they stood on. They called her Miss Caro. They called him Mr. Finn, or sometimes just Boss, depending on the mischief. And no one in town called her the widow anymore. One afternoon, as the sun leaned low across the fields, Finn sat on the porch whittling a bit of pine. A reporter from Austin, passing through, stopped to ask questions about the new orphan home being built on the edge of town. He asked Finn, almost offhand, why her? Of all the women, why Caroline Doss? Finn looked up from his carving, gaze drifting across the yard. Caroline was out in the field, her hair loose in the breeze, laughing as she chased the smallest boy between rows of corn. The bluebonnets swayed all around her, stubborn and bright. He smiled. Because where others saw a widow, he said, I saw a wildfire. That night, when the children were asleep, Caroline found that pine carving on her pillow. It was a horse. Small, unfinished, but full of motion, like it could run. She held it to her chest and closed her eyes. The next morning, the fields burst blue again. Bluebonnets, thick as oceans, rolling with the wind. The children ran through them, chasing each other barefoot, voices high and free. Caroline stood at the edge of the porch, shawl over her shoulders, hair tugged loose by the breeze. She watched them, hers, now. No longer just the woman they whispered about, not a burden, not a widow, but a home, a fire, a story rewritten in dust and bloom. Thank you for riding with us through this story of grit, tenderness, and a love that refused to be buried beneath shame or silence. If Caroline Doss and Finn LaRue's journey moved you, if it made you feel the dust of the old frontier and the fire of a love that defied every scar, then don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to let us know you believe in second chances and fierce, quiet hearts. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more unforgettable tales from the untamed American frontier, where bullets missed but hearts didn't. And remember, sometimes the strongest love grows from the softest, most stubborn roots. We'll see you on the next trail.